Hello everyone, welcome back to freepilotgroundschool.ca. This is our fifth lesson on navigation. We're going to be discussing pre-flight preparation. So at this point, we're going to assume that you've done some flying already, and it's probably time for you to start going somewhere other than your home airport. The home airport's easy, but it's a bit boring. As a pilot, with a pilot's license, you probably want to start traveling somewhere, and so you're going to have to learn how to plan a flight. This is going to come up both on your written test and your flight test, so it's best that you really know this material well. Thankfully, it's interactive and practical, and it's not so dry as the earlier material in this ground school. Let's start off discussing route choice and the factors that affect the route choice. So we want to, well, obviously go the shortest distance. That's usually what we want to do, but we might also be affected by weather, water, mountains, and fuel availability. So let's just say we're taking off here in Shibanawan, and we want to go up to this lake. Well, the easiest way is just go direct. Nothing wrong with that. It's a short distance. There's nothing in the way. We'll just go direct. But now let's just say we're in the mountains in British Columbia and we want to take off here in this channel, and we want to travel to up here. So which way should we go? Well, we could go direct over a 7,000-foot mountain. Might be a bit high. We're on floats. That's pretty high in a float plane. And mountains, there's a bit of a survivability issue too. If you're in the mountains and you lose an engine, it's not like you're landing somewhere nice. It might be a bit miserable. So, well, in this case, we're just going to follow the channel. We're just going to go all the way around. It's a longer distance, but it's probably the safest course of action. We also, let's say the weather turns bad in the mountains. Well, here we can just go land on the water or just fly really low. Compared to in the mountains, we're kind of stuck. First off, we're going to obtain our meteorological information. Look at plan.navcanada.ca or flightplanning.navcanada.ca. We're going to look at the METARs, TAFs, upper winds, GFA. So we already learned to do this in our meteorology lesson, so I'm not going to go over it again. This should be things that you're really competent at by now. Now let's discuss how to prepare a map. This is kind of a long, drawn-out process, but with time you should be able to get it done in just a couple minutes. So let's just say we want to depart the Thunder Bay Airport and we want to go to Kashabawi Float Base up there. So these are circled with the red. The first thing we do is we pick what's called a set heading point. The set heading point is where the formal part of our navigation begins. And it is a landmark that's easy to find that you can fly to without doing much work. And hopefully you'll be approximately at cruise altitude. You don't have to be, but that tends to work out well. So in this case, we're going to use Kekabeka Falls as our set heading point. We're going to draw a line between our departure aerodrome and our set heading point. Next, we're going to draw a line between the set heading point and our destination. We're going to draw 10 nautical mile markers as well as a halfway point. I usually just draw a little tick line for 10 nautical miles, and then at the halfway point, I draw a diamond where the halfway point is. Then we draw 10-degree drift lines, and these will become obvious why we do this later in the lesson. So 1, 2, 3, 4. These drift lines start at the set heading point and go on past the halfway point, and then you do them from the destination backwards, 10 degrees on either side as well. Then we want to measure the distance as well as figure out what our true track is. So I'll let you watch this video on how to figure out the distance and track using your navigation ruler. And I have a link to this YouTube channel down below.
After selecting an appropriate route, the next thing you need to do is determine the true course of your route for every leg where there's a turn, and then determine the distance between checkpoints. So we start to use our nav log at this point, and you fill this in this order. You start out by filling in the appropriate checkpoints that you've selected, and then you go to fill in the true course that you measure from the sectional chart, and then you'll fill in the distance for each leg right here. So I'm going to start out by filling in my checkpoints. So my departure point in this example is Lakeland Airport. So I'm going to put in the code for Lakeland. My first checkpoint is going to be when Zephyrhills Airport is directly to my left. So I'm going to put Zephyrhills on left. The checkpoint after that is when Brooksville Airport is on my left. And my final is my destination airport. So number 1, I have my checkpoints filled in. Number 2, now I need the true course, the course as measured on the sectional between each of these waypoints. So to do this, you need to get out your plotter, and you need to line it up with the course line that you drew on the chart. Remember, when you're using the plotter, to line your course line up along this edge right here. So I can put my course line along this edge of the plotter, and then you need to find a line of longitude or latitude over which to put the center of the plotter, because that's what you're going to use to measure. So there's a line of latitude right here at the bottom by Lakeland, so I'm going to use that for my first one here. Now, as I read my numbers, I have 4 options. You'll see that this line intersects 4 different numbers: 90, 270, 0, and 180. Since I'm using a line of latitude, you need to use this little inner scale. However, you don't need to memorize that because you can simply look and see which of these numbers makes sense, and you can see that the only one that makes sense out of those 4 is 0. So our true course for the initial leg here is 0, or 360 degrees. So I'm going to fill that in on my nav log. Alright, now after I make my turn here, I'm going to have a new true course, so I'm going to have to measure this line. Okay, so it's easier to measure using lines of longitude, so I'm going to try to find a good one. And I see a point right up here where my line intersects a line of longitude. So again, I'm going to take my plotter and I'm going to line it up on this edge right here with my course. And then I'm going to put the grommet, the center of this thing, right over the line of longitude. Now, again, I have numbers to pick from, so I look at where the line intersects the top of the plotter here. So I have a couple of choices. I have 142 degrees, or I have 322 degrees. Now, which one of these makes sense? Well, 140 degrees is heading southeast, and 320 degrees is heading northwest. I'm heading northwest, so I'm going to pick 322 degrees as the reading for my true course on my second leg. Now you'll notice that between my second and my destination here, my second checkpoint and my destination, my true course doesn't change. The line doesn't turn. So I can just fill in the true course for the next block right now. Next, we need to measure distance between the waypoints. So again, using your plotter, find the point where it has 0 and measure the distance from your departure airport to your first checkpoint. We can see as I go up that it's about 14 miles, 14 nautical miles, again using the sectional chart scale. So now I can fill in my first distance. So from Lakeland to my first checkpoint is 14 nautical miles. I'll proceed to measure my next 2 distances, and then I will fill those in these blocks as well.
So we've prepared the map, and now we're going to talk about the flight log. So a flight log is used to record the navigation information that is pertinent to the flight. So here's a sample flight log that I made up. You can make up your own flight log if you want. You can buy them, but this one seems to work well for me. You can notice it has at the top things like the date, the registration, where you're departing from your destination. And then on the top, you have your navigation log. So each point you're landing, you have your distance, true track altitude, your minimum obstacle clearance altitude, true airspeed, and so on. Then on the left, bottom left, we have an en route log. We're going to discuss that later for figuring out our ground speed while we're actually en route. So it's an en route log. So it's only partially completed on the ground. The rest is completed in the air. And then there's other things on the right: fuel management, weight and balance, takeoff and landing distance. So here's part of the navigation log that we just looked at. I just have the top part on here just so you can see it pretty easy. We marked the date, the aircraft registration, the pilot in command, departure point, destination, time that we're landing, estimated time en route. So here's how we fill this out. So the first line is to Kakabeka Falls. I just put KB right there. The distance I measured at 12 miles, the true track 294. It's a 70 knot true airspeed. I'll tell you how I got that shortly. Then I look at the wind velocity, and because we're climbing to a certain altitude, I look at the average of the wind velocity on the ground and the wind velocity at altitude. I also mark the variation, 3 degrees west, which I look at my isogonic line. Then from the set heading point, Kakabeka Falls, to Shabandawan or Kashabawi, it's 36 miles, a true track of 295. I'm planning to fly at 3,500 feet. The minimum obstacle clearance altitude is 2,400 feet. So I look at those numbers, those big numbers in the middle of each grid. True airspeed 91 knots, wind velocity 270 at 10, and the variation is 3 degrees west. So this is where I get this information from. The top number, 70 knots, I look at my time, fuel, and distance to climb chart in my pilot operating handbook. So you see it's 66 knots indicated airspeed, and then I figure out what the true airspeed is based on the altitude. And then the bottom number, 91 knots, I get directly from the performance, cruise performance chart in the pilot operating handbook. I then use my flight computer. I know my track, I know my wind velocity and my true airspeed, and I get my ground speed, 62 knots and 82 knots, and I can also figure out my true heading. So in this case, 297 and 292 knots. Adding the variation of 3 degrees west, I calculate my magnetic heading. Then using the front part of my flight computer, I can calculate my estimated time en route. So that's just a simple division, figuring your distance divided by your speed. And now I figure out my fuel required. For the first one, the climb portion, I look at my time, fuel, distance to climb. So it says 0.7 gallons. And then it also, I also added some time because it only accounts for a climb of 5 minutes. So if you look right here beside 5 minutes, so it only takes me 5 minutes to climb, and you use 0.7, and then it's going to take me another 7 minutes to at cruise altitude at 3,500 feet to get to my set heading point. So and then I figured that out based on the cruise performance in the POH. The bottom number, I look at my gallons per hour, so 4.4 gallons per hour. So 4.4 times, well, 24 minutes, so that will be 0.4. You're going to end up with 2 gallons used for the cruise portion. I can then start filling out my fuel management log. So in the bottom right of this one, so start time and taxi is 0.8. You're wondering, oh, where's 0.8 for start and taxi? Well, it's right here. Okay, it's 0.8. My climb, 1.1. Cruise, 2.0. Then my reserve, that's going to be half an hour of fuel. And I was just a bit generous. I figured we'll use about an average of 6 gallons per hour. Let's say we have to climb or so. So 30 minutes is the minimum, is 3 gallons. So the fuel required is 6.9. Then what I do is I figure out, okay, well, how much fuel do I actually have? Well, I have 22.5 gallons. So then I subtract 22.5 minus 6.9, and I end up with 15.6. So I have an extra 15.6 gallons of fuel. It's kind of nice to know. And 22.5 gallons multiplied by 6, 135 pounds. Let's talk about checkpoints. These checkpoints are used to calculate your actual ground speed that you're doing once you're in flight and a revised estimated time of arrival. And you put this on your en route log. So these checkpoints should be obvious landmarks that you're going to fly over. And at that point, you can do these calculations. So in the first checkpoint, I have KG8, that's Kakabeka Falls Airport. And The second one I have is this first road that you can see circled just prior to the halfway point. The second one I call the Shabandowan Road, and it's and what you can do is you're going to measure the distance from the set heading point. This is important. It's from the set heading point. So road 1 is 13 miles from the set heading point, and the distance to go is 26 miles. And then Shabandowan Road is 26 miles from the set heading point and 10 miles to go. To file your flight plan and itinerary, you need to file one of those if you're more than 25 nautical miles. A flight itinerary, as you can recall, can be filed with any responsible person, and a flight plan you can file online or calling flight service on 1866 WX Brief. There's a standard flight plan form. We should have covered this in our air loss section, but it's probably been a while. And we've covered a lot of ground, so let's quickly review. This is how the form looks like. If we just zoom in a bit, the aircraft identification, V, visual flight rules, it's a Cessna 150. The equipment is VHF/mode C transponder, departing Thunder Bay at 1600 and 91 knots. Altitude is A, 3,500 feet. We're going direct Kakapeka Falls Airport, direct Shabandowan Lake, and there for 45 minutes, and then direct back to Thunder Bay. Total time en route is 1 hour 55 minutes, so that includes our stopover. We have 3 hours 45 minutes endurance, 2 persons on board, white and red, the pilot's cell phone and the remarks, and the pilot in command. We also should conduct a weight and balance prior to the flight, or use a generic weight and balance. And we covered this in flight operations prior, but we'll just review how to do it here. We add up all our weights, use the chart to figure out all the moments, add them all up. Then we are going to consult our center of gravity moment envelope and draw some lines, and you can see we are within range. A review, NOTAMs and Notice to Airmen, they give information about airports and airspace. They're found at plan.navcanada.ca. This is how they look like. The first one's in Muskoka, YQA, it's Muskoka Airport, runway surface condition, 1836, 100% bare and dry, remarks, no runway surface condition or winter maintenance from 23 to 13 Zulu. And then the second one we're looking at, it's in Abbotsford, but it is discussing this heliport at Children and Women's Center. There's a cable crossing. These are the coordinates right there. 3 nautical miles southeast of the aerodrome, 150 feet AGL. Non-standard marking, so the ball markers are missing. And R, I'll just point out R here. It just says it's a revised one. Sometimes you will see like the validity date, and then other times it will say it'll stay open, and then sometimes APRX, like approximately this is how long it's going to be valid for. So I would encourage you, go online, just look at these NOTAMs, just like you did with weather information. Just start reading through NOTAMs, getting used to them. A review, the Canada Flight Supplement is like a phone book of airports, has all sorts of information, most importantly elevation and runways, but other things as well, whether you can get fuel or not. Talking about fuel, if you're not really familiar with an airport, it's always a really good idea, if you're counting on it, to call ahead and see if the fuel is actually available, because it happens more often than you think that they run out of fuel or something happens, because it's not like avgas is, you know, as common as car gas, as automotive fuel. So sometimes you might be counting on going somewhere to get fuel, and then you get there and, oh, sorry, we're out of avgas, we just have Jet A. Well, it doesn't even no good. Now you're stuck at an airport trying to figure out how you're going to get fuel, whether there's an airport close by that you can get some fuel, what you're going to do. Here's another Canada flight supplement. This one's from the electronic version, has a bit more color to it. So most people just download these now. Just get a subscription, download it to their iPad or whatever they're using their phone. Before you go flying, you should ensure that the aircraft is serviceable, so there's no unrectified defects unless they are deferred. The annual inspection has been done in the last year, and the out-of-phase items such as tachometer, transponder, and ELT are done. We discussed this in air law, so you can review that if you want to. Might also be a good idea. You can ask your aircraft maintenance engineer, hey, can you just help me and show me what needs to be done? And they're a wealth of information on this sort of thing. Even though if you're the aircraft owner, you are responsible for it. They know kind of what these schedules are. You can find these in appendix, CAR 625 appendix C would be the out of phase items. So here's just an example of an annual inspection done. Well, here it says 100-hour inspection, so it's a commercially operated aircraft, or maybe. And you can see this. I'll just point it out here. This maintenance entry. Okay, so this is. If you're thinking of buying an airplane, I'll just throw this in here. This is a nice entry. Some of them are typed out, which is even nicer. But you can see they did all sorts of work here. And you're always going to find little things on airplanes that need to be done. So here, they replaced the gaskets. They replaced an engine mount heat shield, a door latch. These are just things, small maintenance things that an aircraft owner should have repaired as things get worn. If you see an airplane, you're thinking of buying an airplane, and every annual inspection says annual inspection completed, no faults found. And the next year, annual inspection completed, no faults found. That should be a big red flag, because I've owned several airplanes. There's always little things that need to be worked on. And if somebody doesn't find anything, it means either they're not looking hard enough and they didn't do an annual inspection, or they found it and just decided to write in the logbooks that there's no faults anyway, just to make the owner happy or something like that. So if you have really short logbook entries for annual inspections, please stay away from those airplanes. Look for an aircraft that's been properly maintained. You'll save a lot of money in the long run. What ends up happening, you buy an airplane that has no faults for 5 years, you bring it to your own aircraft maintenance engineer. Hopefully he or she is somewhat reputable, and then they'll look at it and go like, man, you've got 5 years of back maintenance that you need to take care of. All of a sudden you're looking at a $10,000 repair bill, and that great deal of an airplane you just got doesn't seem to be such a great deal after all. We covered this earlier, what documents you need on board. Just a reminder, AeroJIP, airworthiness certificate, registration, operating handbook, weight and balance, journey log, insurance, and pilot license. Just a quick review, the route selection factors, weather, terrain, fuel, and water. We have to have the AeroJIP documents on board. And then the rest of this lesson I can't really review very well because, well, it just requires a lot of practice. But here you go for your review, some things that you need to think about. You have your set heading point here in Kakabeka Falls. That's where your navigation officially starts. You're going to fill out your VFR flight log, distance, you measure, track, you measure. Then you're going to look in your pilot operating handbook for your true airspeed. Look online to get your your wind velocity. Then use the backside of your flight computer to figure out your ground speed and true heading. Correct for variation to get your magnetic heading. And then when you have your ground speed and your distance, you can figure out the time en route and the fuel required. You're going to look at your fuel flow in your pilot operating handbook, both the climb performance and the cruise performance. Also going to pick a couple or a few checkpoints and fill out your en route log, and your distance flown is the distance from the set heading point. And we're going to discuss in your next lesson how you're actually going to use this en route log when we talk about in-flight navigation and the work we're going to do in the air to figure out our revised estimated time of arrival. Some sample test questions. Is winter maintenance available at 0600 local time? So here it says no RSC or winter maintenance from 23 to 1300 Zulu. So you should know Muskoka in the Eastern time zone and 0600 local time. So we add 5 hours onto that. It's going to be 1300. So right around that time, yeah, right at 1300, that's when they're going to start winter maintenance. So when they come in the morning, basically what they're telling you is they show up at 6 in the morning and they leave at 8 at night. My apologies about my macabre sense of humor. It is daylight and you're overflying the airport at 8,000 feet. You hear a thud, but the plane is still flying. What did you most likely hit? Okay, so look at caution. Parachuting over airport 12,500 feet below. Occasionally daylight by no time. I think you hit a skydiver. It's kind of sad. So B is the correct answer. They're not that humorous / macabre on your written tests, but. Last question, you are lined up for the northeast runway. So the northeast runway is going to be runway 05. Okay, 05, what is your true heading? So remember, this is magnetic heading and we're working backwards now. So the runway 05 right there is 051 right here. So to go from true to magnetic, you do west is best. This time it's backwards. So we have 20 degrees west. So we're going to subtract 20 from 51. So the true heading, because we're going backwards, is going to be 031. That concludes this lesson on pre-flight preparation. We're almost done navigation. The next lesson is going to be doing in-flight navigation. I encourage you to go on freepilotgroundschool.ca. There's a bunch of sample flights that you can do, complete with maps, and you can just start working on practicing different flights in different regions of the country. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you in our next lesson.